All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast. Greg LeBuff here with you. We got Dustin Delray, Brad Vanderleit. We had a couple weeks off here as the summer kind of kicks in, and different things, various things, family things, life things kind of pick up. But we're back tonight. Couldn't be happier to be back with everybody. Thanks a lot for joining me, guys. And so tonight's topic. It's an interesting one, and if I'm 100% truthful, I picked the topic I wanted to for us to speak about or unpack tonight, but I didn't put a lot of thought into each of the individual bullet points that I kind of wanted to bring up because I thought this will just be a fun thing to unpack together and kind of explore, and I think the audience is going to get a lot out of it. And as always, our whole mission is to share with you the process by which not only did we start the weaponization process and go from just what you'd consider to be an unweaponized man, untrained, unrestrained, and the process that has allowed us to become true protectors, and we use the word R, protect R, ready, real, resilient, relentless, and ruthless in the face of violent criminal assault. This is our mission to be able to protect our families, and it is nothing more than a process, right? And so one of our favorite sayings is work the process because the process works. And tonight's topic is going to be on organizing the warrior's toolbox. And maybe just before we kick to the intro, I'll set it up this way. It is very, very common to hear people in this kind of personal protection, self-defense type industry to always talk about, because again, people are training, people are learning, people are growing, which is a great thing. But you'll often hear people say, I got another tool for the toolbox. And one of the things that I'd want people to consider is that you have to be very careful about just this collection of tools for the toolbox, right? And of course, we could be talking about physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, physiological tools. So that's a lot of tools. And if you're constantly just collecting, you have to have a way to organize that warrior's toolbox to keep things accessible, to keep things functional. And that is I want to share some insights on how we organize the warrior's toolbox. So I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of this, and I'm very interested to hear your guys' take on this. So that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to help you guys organize the warrior's toolbox so that you can continue to work the process, become the weaponized man to protect yourself, your family, and other innocent people. We're going to be back in a few seconds, and we're going to dive into this. Every day I hear more stories of good people being brutally assaulted and murdered by some individual who has a repeat history of violent offenses, drug addiction, and mental health issues, who is free to walk the streets in the same city where I live, work, and where I am raising my two daughters. Well, I'm tired of screaming at the TV, and enough is enough. Throughout history, there have always been men willing to answer the call to the threats against our way of life. Well, today, that threat is right outside our doors, on our streets, in our neighborhoods, on our public transportation system, outside the places we work, and even outside of our children's schools. My new mission is to create and train a group of men that believe in the right to life and value the freedom a man has to protect his life, his family, and his property. I'm Greg LeBuff. Welcome to the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast. Okay. All right, so we're back. So again, I wanted to talk about organizing the warrior's toolbox, and there's a lot of different ways that we can go on this. And like I said, I didn't pick one specific way and kind of map out. I mean, I never fully map out really all of the points we're going to talk about. Often I come up with a topic, and the topic is based off just what's happening in my privates and in our own training during the weeks. And I kind of think, okay, this is something I want to share with people. And then often there's one or two kind of immutable concepts that you want to make sure you touch on. But other than that, we go very organic at this. We're very unscripted. I like people to try to have a little bit of a look behind the curtain, so to speak, on just what are the conversations like that we have when we're just, away from the public eye kind of thing and stuff. And just this is how warriors talk. This is how protectors talk. So tonight I think is going to be a really good example of this. But let's just start with the concept of the toolbox. I personally don't prescribe to that that euphemism or that terminology or that imagery where I just think, I'm adding tools to the toolbox. I may have said that once out of my 30-year career. And the reason that I don't really prescribe to that is, to me, it has a very eclectic feel. And so for me personally, when I think about like the skill sets that I'm collecting or the skill sets that I'm acquiring through this process, I think of it again, it's very Bruce Lee-esque, but yet rings true. It is constantly a daily decrease. I'm actually not trying to add more and more different tools. What I'm always trying to do is kind of, take things like, so you might, whether it's a concept, whether it's a tactic, a technique, a strategy, we take it and you kind of put it through a process, a functionalization test. To me, it's almost like taking a car, you build and design a car, and then you ram it into a fucking brick wall. You put a crash test dummy and you ram it into a brick wall. And you got to see how it handles impact. So let's say your goal for that car is you're in charge of safety. Well, then you're looking at how the front end collapsed, how the motor mounts are. You're looking at all these different features where you say, what I'm trying to do is make the occupants of that vehicle as safe as possible. And so you're always field testing things. And so to me, again, this process of whittling things down, you want to travel light when it comes to functionalization. We often use another analogy where you might compare one of the world's top surgeons and then compare them to a combat medic. And context determines content. In the context of a medical procedure being done in the relative safety and cleanliness and, of a fully staffed surgical suite, the surgeon is going to be able to perform many, many, many types of surgeries with a high level of success because they're surrounded with all of the proper tools, the equipment, the environment. Like, they just have everything that they need, right? Obviously, we're talking theoretically, but I think that translates fairly well to the real world. Where a combat medic has almost none of those things. They have only the equipment they can carry on them. They have a very particular set of skill sets. They're often working in a very specific type of environment. So in the chaos and, the last thing you have is typically a sterile type environment. Often you're still in an active war zone. So I think people get the analogy that a combat medic travels a lot lighter, but yet they still save countless lives. They save limbs. They do amazing things. And so I've always kind of looked at what we do as, like, again, to use this idea of a toolbox, as we want to operate much more like the combat medic. Kind of like your skill sets that you're acquiring are part of a go bag, right? Because, if I'm facing a threat, me and my family, we're often, I don't have all the tools. I'm not always in my house where I have all of my equipment, all of my tools. I have the a home court advantage. If I got my house laid out a certain way, I've got, weapons laid out different ways. I understand my choke points and counter ambush points and all this type of stuff. You don't have that luxury. So one thing I think for a warrior's toolbox is you have to create the standard that you're developing the box for. What are you training for? Are you training to be that combat medic? Or are you training to be, a surgeon in a fully equipped, fully staffed, fully functional, top of the line hospital? That guy's going to have a lot more tools, a lot more machinery, a lot more equipment and gadgets and all that kind of stuff. So, I don't. Hopefully that this analogy resonates with people. But just off the hop, that's my standard. And so I'd like each of you guys just to kind of break down, like, how do you perceive this warrior's toolbox? How big or small? What is the standard by which you are even, you have to pick your box. You have to pick your toolkit, and then you got to build it to work for you. So where do you guys land on this concept?
Yeah. For me, like, kind of the first thing that hit me as you started to explain what you wanted to talk about was kind of two different, we'll just say personality types or types of people, both of which we are not. And the first one is what you just described. It's more that martial artist or almost like that historian type where they want a black belt in 7 different arts and they want to know every different, drill, like training drill you can possibly know in every art and all this stuff. It's like they're collectors. Do you know what I mean? They want to have a library of things at their disposal, not so much for self-defense, but just because they enjoy learning, or maybe because they wrongly think that is the best method for self-defense. But I think you did a really good job of unpacking that person. And that was kind of one of the first things that hit me. And then the other was sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, which we run into this all the time, which is the person who's only got one thing in their toolbox. Get a gun. And it's like, okay. So on the one extreme, you have the toolbox that's overflowing with options and ideas. But then at the other end, you have I have the one tool that solves everything. And so for me, it's like, no, like we're in between those two extremes. And like you said, we're probably arguably closer to like the more simplistic toolbox without question. But we very much understand that there is no one tool, that, context determines content. So you can't just say, oh, I'll just get a gun, just carry a gun. Like, well, number one, we're podcasting in Canada. So last I checked, we're not legally allowed to conceal carry. We can't walk down the street with assault rifles. So, there's that whole problem. But yeah, so for me, it's like that toolbox is exactly what you described. It's like the combat medic. I love that analogy because that's very much how I see us, is like, what is the minimal amount of things that can make me the absolute most well-rounded and set up for success, which at the end of the day is just surviving violence. So
Perfect. Awesome. Brad.
Yeah, I'm probably going to echo what both you guys said. Obviously, I'm going to repeat it because I think people need to hear it more and more and more, is context determines the content. It's something that you guys both said, and, I'm going to say as well. And the thing that really, like, the daily decrease, not the daily increase, really made me think of one point, and that's filler, right? And so when you talk about context determines the content, it's like, well, what are we talking about? Surviving against lethal force, violent criminal assault. So we study criminality to understand what exactly that context is. So we need tools, mental, physical, intellectual tools that help aid in our survival. We don't need extra tools. We need the required tools to do the job. Again, the combat medic. He's not carrying around extra shit that he doesn't need. He's carrying around stuff that's required to be proficient at his job. And for us too, like carrying around and having, oh, this is really neat to learn, or that's cool, and all these things, like that's fine if people want to learn those martial art things and be that martial artist, but just identify what exactly that is. When you start bringing that into the world of violence, it's filler. And the one thing that I really thought about was how dangerous filler is, right? You have all these extra things that are at your disposal, so to speak. You're just increasing your reaction time, right? What's the best thing that you could be doing to aid in your survival right now? You don't need options. The more options you have, the longer your reaction time is going to be. So that's why for me was really connecting that to the filler, to the context, and just having that daily decrease. Because again, like Dustin said, it's not like we don't want any tools. We have to have the tactics, the tools, the strategies that are going to aid in our survival, but we don't need extra shit. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. Okay. So again, I think just as a start point, each of us kind of breaks down, what our perception is on the kind of idea of the warrior's toolbox, because obviously everyone that's training is learning, and when you're learning, you are growing and you are accumulating, you are developing. And I get the overall analogy of having this toolbox because, I mean, again, like, a plumber to an electrician to a mechanic, everyone has the tools of the trade. And so whether you're, talking about being a professional fighter or a world-class martial artist, or a protector for your family when it comes to protecting them from violent criminal assault, I get the analogy. So I think the next thing, I think we've all kind of articulated where we fall on that. And so the next thing for me is kind of like, if you are going to organize the toolbox, so like whatever skill sets you are acquiring, okay, whether that's, again, the psychology, people don't understand, I think, too, like, just to give people a bit of an idea, like there's the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual side of things. So the physical is where we might be talking about the different techniques or tools. You might be talking about the strategies, the tactics. Of course, the psychology, you're talking about three kind of, fairly core areas of self-belief, specific beliefs, and global beliefs. All of those things are going to shape and develop your mindset, your killer instinct. Those things are going to have impact on your resiliency, all of these types of things. I think you have to have a litmus test. Is kind of one of the next things that helps really organize. And just again, I'm really trying to think of this and speak just for me personally, and then people can kind of apply it if they feel it's going to serve them as well. But my litmus test for me, which again, if I'm always about a daily decrease, meaning what I'm always looking to do, and this speaks exactly to the terminology you shared, Brad, which is the last thing I want, what I'm very cautious about, is not allowing a lot of filler. And we have a saying, and the saying is not meant to be braggadocious and, kind of an over-the-top saying. It's actually, if you understand the context we're talking about right now, it's a very, very serious point. And the saying is all killer, no filler. And what that means is that, listen, as an adult who has a family, who has adult responsibilities, and meaning you got friends and families and commitment and work, and, it's just time is very precious. And we all definitely go through phases in our life when your kids are young. I don't know, if you got kids, it doesn't even really matter. There's always a time demand on that, which we as fathers love. Family is huge for us. What I'm getting at is that you only have so much time that you're dedicating to your training. When I was in my 20s and 30s and even early 40s, when I didn't have the family, all my time went into training and teaching. And then as you get older, you get a family, that has to shift. And I do this for a living, yet it's still, there's time demands. But so for me, every moment that I invest into my training, I don't want the filler. I don't want to waste it. So a litmus test for me on that, how do I know, is I'm not looking to acquire new skill sets. I'm constantly looking to upgrade skill sets. And I mean not just improve upon a current skill set, meaning I have no loyalty to any art or any technique or any tool or any strategy or any tactic or any instructor. You cannot have loyalties. Loyalties create biases. You have to just see it for what it is. Violence doesn't ask. Violence doesn't give a fuck. It doesn't care if 10 years ago this technique worked great and say, well, I happen to be really good at that. It doesn't give a shit. If violence has changed and criminals have figured out how to circumvent your strategy or tactic, then you got to upgrade your strategy or tactics. So for me, one of the big litmus tests that organizes my toolbox is in fact the fact that I have a kill chain. It's my strategies. And if I share a concept with you, right, strategy has to be first, because strategy always determines the tactics. Give me any scenario where the tactic determines the strategy. It doesn't work that way. It's the strategy. You have to have a strategy. And if you want to go, what's before strategy is problem. So what's the problem that I'm trying to solve? Which is just to say, what's the standard that you're training against? And so the standard that I'm training against, outgunned, outmanned, bigger, stronger people, better than me, mass attack with weapons, life and death, violent criminal assault, then you have to look and say, okay, so now I have to have a strategy. The strategy determines the tactics, and the tactics determine the tool selection. So the litmus test always goes in this order. So if I can make this point clear, when you have a strategy, I'm always saying, well, this is my strategic impact that I'm looking to achieve. This is my strategic mission. The second you have what you have, the only thing you care about is achieving the strategic mission. Then you don't care about the tactic. You'll choose whatever tactic will easiest and best allow you to achieve the strategy. You definitely don't give a fuck about the tool, because once you have the strategy and then the tactic becomes clear, you're going to pick the tool that least amount of effort for highest success probability. And you don't give you have no bias. But I don't think people understand that when you have the strategy or the kill chain, this becomes how I organize the toolbox. Because when I said that I'm always looking to upgrade, I'm looking at the strategy, and if something new comes in, a new concept, a new tactic, a new tool, a new whatever it is, it has to fulfill the strategy. I have something to compare it to. And then I can look and say, hey, the way that I was doing this is infinitely better. So guess what? That's out, this is in. You don't need, there might be 2 or 3 different types of hammers. You got a roofing hammer, you got a finishing hammer, you got a sledgehammer, right? There's different types of hammers, but you don't need 6 of each. When you have a hammer, anything, if it's, you need a finishing hammer, you have it. You don't need 16 finishing hammers. But people will continue to collect, like punching or like whatever tools you're looking at, kicks and different things. They don't even have a way to organize or differentiate between what types of kicks. Like, and this is very general, but you might have your power kicks. You look at a tie kick. Well, if you want to take split a guy's femur in half, A tie kick is a pretty good fucking way to do that. So that becomes kind of like your sledgehammer kick, right? A teep kick or a savate kick is a very different type of kick. But you don't need to have the entirety of the art of savate. I'm not saying that you can't train savate and that it's not great. I'm just saying you don't need all the savate kicks. Because one or two savate kicks is a very finesse, very pinpoint, and very devastating, especially if you're doing it the way it's meant to be with the shoe on, with the lead weight at the tip of the shoe. But it is a very specific thing. So, but how do you know if you can't compare it and say, well, what's my strategic mission? Like, this would lead us into a whole different conversation. But if I asked each of you right now what your strategic mission is, I already know the singular question that you would come up with. You can't answer that until you understand the problem. You'd say, what's the problem? And if I said posturing predator, or if I said blitzer, instantaneously you'd be able to tell me what your strategic mission is, right? It's very, very simple, because what's the strategic impact you need to have against a posturing predator? Well, I can tell you. I need to have the Trojan horse, because falsehood has to precede reality. Then I have to deal with the fact that they are ready, meaning what? They have base and balance. So then my flashbangs create the 3Ds. That's the strategic impact I need to have in the situation. Then I'm going to use a smash and grab to exploit the situation, and I'm going to bury the guy in an avalanche of injury. It's like, that's the strategic mission. Those are the 4 strategies I would use that build up the kill chain. Then and only then do I even begin to look at tactics. But how do I determine if this tactic that I now have discovered, that somebody taught me, that I've seen, how do I determine if that tactic is better than the tactic I currently use? Because I have no loyalty to the tactic I currently use. But what I have to do is have a litmus test to be able to functionally test it and go, you know what? This makes my life easier. This is far more effective. This is XYZ. And now that tactic's out, and then you say, hey, the guy that trained with you 6 months ago goes, oh, I remember you taught me this. I say, yeah, we don't do that anymore. Or at least I don't do them anymore. Why? Because this new thing came along. But it's like, did you just take it because it was new and shiny? You know, you can't be like a fish that's attracted to shiny, spinny things in the water. You have to actually have a process, a litmus test, for what determines what actually makes the lineup and what gets rejected, without bias, without prejudice. How many times, I'm going to ask a question, but I want you guys to share your thoughts on this too. But, there's been many times over 30 years that I have gotten rid of strategies, tactics, or tools that I was really, really, really good at, that I spent a ton of time investing to get good at, like to really functionalize. But why did I get rid of them? Because a better way came along. But I'll tell you what, the better way was never typically easier for me to do right off the bat. Does that make sense? If you've been frying pancakes for 15 years, you're the world's greatest pancake cooker, and then someone comes along and says, here's a better, more nutritious, better tasting fuel for you, and the cooking process is totally different, you might go, I totally agree. Man, I started eating this, I feel way better, all these types of things, but you're probably not as good at cooking it. You get what I mean? Like, it's a weird analogy, but it's like, you actually have to be able to stop doing the thing that you're really good at. And for most people, they can't do that, because then they feel like they just wasted their time. But for me, I always feel like, no, that tool served me for 20-something years. It's time for it to retire, because I'm growing. My strategies, my tactics, my tools have to continuously grow, but I have to remember that what we're talking about tonight is that the warrior's toolbox is much more like the combat medic's toolbox. You got to be light. You got to travel fast. You got to be working. You got to be always on the vanguard of what the fuck is happening. And so you have to get rid of like and dislike. Wouldn't it be nice if at 53 years old, I thought, you know what? The greatest thing is I got into this shit, not martial arts altogether, but got into the weaponizing process in my 20s, early 20s. Wouldn't it be great if you go, thank God I put all my hard work in my 20s and 30s when I was young, had energy, had all this physical strength and flexibility, all this type of stuff. But now that I'm 53, I don't have to do that anymore. Like the hard work's over. No, like I'm learning new shit every time. I'm constantly, because the violent criminal doesn't change. The violent criminal is constantly changing. And so I have to be constantly upgrading my skill sets. I have to be upgrading my mindset. I have to be upgrading, and I have to constantly be cleaning out the toolkit and upgrading to new, better, more functional things. And I have to work just as hard to learn those things, to functionalize those things. So for me, how I organize my toolkit is by having the litmus test. And the litmus test for me is I know what my strategies are. And because I know the problem, I understand the problem. If the problem changes, then I can adapt my strategies, which we have done also. But strategies change far less than tactics and tools. Those things change all the fucking time because we're always looking for an easier, better, more efficient, functional way to achieve the strategic impact we want to have. So the problem in the strategies are far more consistent. So to me, it's a litmus test. I don't know, you guys can share your thoughts on that, as well as share your process for how you keep your toolkit, your toolbox organized.
Yeah, you know what? Like, I'm going to hit something that's you probably said like 100 times, even in your last little bit here. We've said thousands of times in the existence of this podcast, and hundreds of thousands of times throughout the last however many years. You have to own the problem. And it's such a foundational thing that leads you to so many realizations, and that's like, that is the litmus test. Like you even said, it's like, you got to own the problem, and, the one thing, and I'm thinking about people that are collecting boulders, they're adding tools to the toolkit. And it's like the owning of the problem is one side of the equation, in my opinion. And then it's like, what do you want? Asking that question is like, what do you want? Do you want to own that problem and be the solution to the problem? Because that's completely different than being like, yeah, I know there's a problem out there, but I choose to do this. And that could be whatever other thing that they're doing, going and training in a ton of different things, and all, like you said, eclectically, and say, well, what do you want? Well, I want to be a solution for the problem. Okay. Again, owning the problem is the first step, and then seeking out that solution, the strategies for that problem. I can't emphasize that enough, because it's always been the root. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered that question or not.
Oh, well, I think I know that you're running parallel to what I'm saying, and I think it's important for people to understand. And if we try to add any clarity, if it's needed, it's like, by virtue of owning the problem and actually being taught strategies. Like, again, strategies are like sitting down and having a war meeting and developing like your battle plans for how you're going to win the overall war. You can't just worry about winning a battle. Like, you have to have a plan for how you're going to win the overall war. Violence is war. And even though you might find yourself in a singular-esque battle within that war, your strategies are more far-reaching than that. And when you have that becomes what we call the standard. Like, that is the litmus test. So again, you're just echoing so that people can understand. Because so many people, if you ask them again, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Either their answer is very, very general. Like, well, I want to be able to protect myself. If somebody fucks with me or my family, I want to be able to protect myself. Okay, but who's the somebody? Like, that's not the problem. That's a very general, that's like, I just became a doctor. What type of medicine do you practice? Healthy medicine, like, just, like, so you're a nutritionalist, you're like, you do it, just, general overall health. It's like, well, that person's fairly useless, because problems tend to come back to some origin of specificity. And that's why they have specialists. That's why, your general doctor might diagnose this, then say, oh, this is gastral, this is, podiatry, foot, and they'll send you to specialists. So you have to be a specialist in the sense of, you got to make a commitment to what your goal is. You can't just say, well, I'm going to train I want to be a martial artist. And that doesn't mean that you can step in and be a professional fighter. No more than a professional fighter can step in and be a professional soldier. Like, they're different standards for what you're training to.
Different context.
Yeah, it's different. Well, again, different context, which determines different content. And so again, isn't it funny how we all keep landing back on what's the goal here, and then you got to own that problem, because from that, then you're going to have organization within your toolbox. But a lot of people train eclectically. They see something, and again, everything's a lure, and people behave like fish. They see it, they're attracted to it. It gets hits, it gets likes, and they just see guys doing flying arm bars and omoplatas and there's all of the different flashy things they might see from Thai boxing or whatever, and they want those skill sets because you automatically get, you get associated credit, you get associative status. If you're like, oh, I do jiu-jitsu, and so look at somebody doing jiu-jitsu and he's manhandling somebody and spins him around and catches him in a fucking flying guillotine or flying, jumping armbar or triangle choke, and yeah, that's what I do. That's jiu-jitsu. I do that. And so people are like, wow, you know what I mean? And it's like, then they just collect all kinds of different shit and it never really comes back to the standard because they're just like, I'm a martial artist. What the fuck does that mean? Like, I don't get what that means. Like, so I get it. And I think it's, again, just a very important concept for people to get. So Dustin, sorry, we kind of left you out a bit.
It's all good. No, I mean, the initial thing I'll say is very much what Brad said. One slight word change, but my response to your question was basically, yeah, like you have to stay connected to the problem, which is no different than owning the problem. But I guess the way I was thinking about it or would elaborate on it is slightly different. Just in the sense that, like, to be connected to the problem, it's like you always have to be studying the problem. It's like, well, what's your area of operations? Do you know what I mean? Like, what is the problem? You said it yourself. Like, violent criminals are constantly changing. If you look back over the last 30 years, the types of assaults that happen and stuff like that, it's always changing. So if you're not constantly kind of staying up to date and essentially upgrading your software, then, you know what I mean? That's what dictates your hardware. And so I think if anyone who's doing it the other way around is they've got it backwards. So I think for us, a lot of it, and for me, is like, yeah, you got to kind of continually study criminality and violence and what it looks like. And then I think too, you can even go not a step further, but just instead of just saying like, well, what is the problem? It's like, but what is my problem? And then that changes over my journey. Like when I started this 25 years ago, I was single, I had no kids, I had a very different area of operations in my day-to-day life. I was in university, which took me to very different places on, Friday and Saturday nights than where I am today on Friday and Saturday nights. I'm now married, I have kids, like, do you know what I mean? So like as all these life factors change, and then even just like habitual patterns because of where you work and stuff like that. So it's like you have to be constantly assessing all of those things, which all ultimately make up your problem in the context of the bigger problem, which is, violent criminals, assault. So I think if you're always doing that, you're always questioning it and saying, okay, well, what is it? How do I better understand my current problem? And then that's the only way you're going to get by questioning it is you're going to determine, okay, well, then do my strategies need to change? Do you know what I mean? And then therefore, as you did a good job explaining, as soon as you acknowledge that a strategy has to change, automatically you got to look at the tactics and then look at the tools and be like, do those need to change if a strategy changes? And so I think for me, and like you guys said it too, but it's just, yeah, staying connected to that problem, adding in the very specifics of your particular problems that also, kind of make that even more potentially challenging. I think for me, that's a big part of it.
Yeah. No, again, I think, it might seem slightly redundant to people, but I also wanted people to have three different perspectives. Like, we don't talk about this stuff before. These are legitimate. I'm speaking for myself. Each of you is speaking for yourself. And yet there's the immutable concept of each of us, because we have chosen our standard by which we're going to train, meaning we've accepted what our mission is. And I think one of the things about this podcast that I hope resonates with people, and I don't know if it would consciously for most people, but we're always talking about the same fucking thing. Like, it just doesn't change, and it never will. It's like we're always talking about, what happens when you got bigger, stronger motherfuckers who outgun you, outman you, do not value fucking life, have no problem wiping you or your family. Like, violence is about one thing, that's destruction. And I there is not better words to articulate that problem. People just don't give a fuck. There's people in this world that just don't give a flying fuck, and they will wipe you off the face of the earth for nothing. They don't care. It's entertaining to them. And there's no such thing as fucking fair. They're not looking to fight you. They're not looking. They enjoy the victory of destroying you and your family. That victory is not softened or sullied or degraded in any way when there's 5 of them, and when they cheat and use bats and knives and machetes. That's more pleasurable to them. That's funny to them, like, because that's violence. Of course, that's what you're going to do. You know what I mean? And people don't get that, but that's the standard. So that is the problem that we have all chosen. And so when we're talking about the Warriors Toolbox, you're going to see a very different type of toolbox. You know, if we go to Home Depot and we each go to pick out a toolbox, you know, a general contractor who, you know, does some framing, he does some of the plumbing, does some of the electrical, yeah, you know, he runs the trades, this and that. He's going to have a very different equipment setup. You know, he's going to have propane space heaters, and he's going to have tarps, and he's going to have painter's tape, and he's going to have electrical boxes. He's just going to have a whole myriad of shit. And because he's doing a little bit of everything. And then, you know, and he's gonna have all of these I got my tile guys, I got my frame, I got my roofing guys, I got all these guys, and he's running, you know, it's a very, you know, and yet at the end of the day, he's producing, you know, a really cool project. But that we're not general contractors. We're very, very fucking specific. So the toolkit that we buy is going to be much more keen to the combat medic. I mean, the only thing I care about is when I'm out with my family is being able to fucking protect them. I want to be able to use the tool of violence. If and when I need to. When legally, morally justified, I will use the tool of violence in a very strategic and very surgical manner to neutralize any imminent threat to me and my family. And I don't know what that means in the sense of like, well, how far does that have to go? I don't know. It's not up to me. I'm not the threat. I will neutralize any imminent threat where it is reasonable for me to believe that I am facing, or me and my family are facing, imminent grievous bodily harm or death. That might take one little thing, and that threat and that guy or that person or that group's no longer a threat, and we're allowed to escape from that. And it might require infinitely more than that. I don't fucking know, because I'm not making those decisions. These are bad people that are making those decisions. But that standard, like, this is it. You know, I guess my point here, then I think, Dustin, you can jump in on it. If I bought a storage space that is a 10-foot by 10-foot storage space, and then I rented a storage space that is a 50-foot by 50-foot, you're going to fill them. You're going to fucking fill it. If you give yourself the space to put shit, everybody in the world knows you'll fucking fill it. So, you know the greatest thing about buying this property? I got room to put all my shit. Wait a year or two. And you go, I don't even know where, I have no room to put my shit. We need a bigger fucking place. Because you'll collect it. It's like most people, if you earn it, you'll spend it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you'll figure out a way to spend it. You'll figure out a way to accumulate shit. That is part of the massive problem of the Warriors Toolbox. People don't know what the fuck they're training for. And so they just start collecting because everybody wants to show you shit. And everybody's like, this is the shit. But is it the shit for you? I don't know. I can't imagine that there's many combat medics out there that got invited to a sales pitch for one of the latest and greatest MRI machines. Probably not the target market for a $5 million, 3 fucking 5-ton, MRI machine. Not really useful for combat medics. Probably not a lot of them at the presentation, at the sales pitch. You know what I mean? And there's a reason why. Because their toolbox is different. Different mission. Sorry, I think, Dustin, you had something to add.
Yeah, no, you just reminded me of something, a point I wanted to make earlier, and I missed it, was, we have that expression, violence never asks, which basically just means it can happen anytime. It's not up to you, which you just kind of reiterated. But I think also it's like violence also doesn't care what you want or what you want to do. And I think that's also a big factor in my toolbox is like, you have to be willing to let go of what you want to do or how you want to handle violence. It doesn't matter. It's completely irrelevant. So it's like all ego and opinion has to disappear at the door, because it all comes down to what do you need to do because of the nature of the problem. And then that dictates all your strategy and everything else. So I think there's just, yeah, a point to hit on, especially like when you hit on the idea of like, oh yeah, flying armbar, like that's so cool. And I think that's what it is some people, they kind of get caught up in the romance of like some of these super neat things like techniques and stuff and even tactics. And it's just like, yeah, but too bad. Like violence doesn't care what you want. And that's not what's going to work. So for me, it's like identifying the needs, not the wants, is also a big part of how I decide what goes in, what stays in my toolbox long term.
Yeah, 100%. Brad, anything you want to throw down range?
Yeah, 100%. We were talking, and you kind of brought that analogy forward of going to Home Depot and having a different set of people acquiring a different set of tools, right? And it made me think of just prioritizing what's in your toolbox. You know, like if you look at, I don't know, let's say a plumber, right? He could have a tool in there that is so specialized. He's like, I use this thing probably every 2 to 3 years,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, what the fuck's it there for? You know, when you're talking about being in violence, and it's like, if I have a tool that I'm like, yeah, this is really good when, you know, it's this exact precise situation, it doesn't fucking matter, right? It doesn't need to be there. Because the bottom line is the strategy, with the strategies that you have to face with violence, it's like, yeah, sure, that would be the perfect sterile scenario, but that never happens. But you know what I can do? I can make it work with this. You know, how many people use a fucking wrench as a hammer? You know, in a moment, it's like, I got to hammer this nail. Don't have a hammer, but I got a wrench. So I'm going to make it work because the strategy is to get the nail into the board, but I don't have a hammer. So I'm going to use the tool that I have because I know that I can make it work with a wrench, right? Is it what I should be? No. But like, I don't know. Might be kind of getting a little bit loose with the analogy. But again, it's like, you can make it work because you understand the overall strategy, right?
Yeah. No, I like it, and I think what you're really getting at too is a very powerful attribute, probably one of the most important attributes, which is adaptability. And you know, the analogy of, again, like, you know, I need to get this nail driven in. I don't have the hammer, but I have this, you know, a metal fucking wrench, which is going to, you know, work just fine. You know, of course, in a construction setting, you know, not the best thing to do. But what you're talking about with what we're doing is when you have the strategy is the most important thing. The tactics and tools that you have, like you're building a very sparse set of tools for sure, and then you got, you know, an array of tactics, all functional tactics. Those things do adapt. You can adapt those strategies and those tools to a situation much more effectively than, you know, using a wrench as a hammer. But the analogy stands true because that's what it is. It's adaptability, and I think that this is a really interesting. I think that everything we've been talking about, to state it clearly, is when you have the standard, like what's the problem you're trying to solve, and then when you have the strategies, right? Because you got to have strategies. That's the litmus test. It's not. You don't look at it and go, "This is the." You know how many techniques I've been shown over my lifetime that are like devastatingly powerful techniques, where it's like, without a doubt, they work. Like there's no arguing they work, but they don't fit into the context of my strategies for the problem that I'm choosing to solve. It's no different than just, I'm building a very specific puzzle. The pieces that I have fit into and create a picture of a very specific type of puzzle, which is problem solving the violence. That's not to say that there's not, you look over at another puzzle and go, that puzzle is beautiful and functional in its own way, but you can't take that piece of the puzzle out and make it fit into yours. I don't need that piece. Say, but look at it, it's so beautiful and it's such an integral part to my puzzle. Yeah, to your puzzle. But it's like, I can see and appreciate the beauty, the athleticism, whatever it is, but it doesn't fit with me. But what I love is that one of the biggest compartments on a warrior's toolkit for my application, and I believe you guys will agree, you can speak to it, is that it's not all these hard tools. One of the massive compartments is that I build attributes that allow me to best implement the tools that I do have. So meaning, what's my strategic mission? What are the tactics? I don't just need the hard tools, I need to develop the attributes that allow me to utilize the tools and the tactics that I do have to achieve my strategic mission. So attribute development becomes massive for us. So, I mean, for me, that is how we develop, and the time that we put into developing attributes, that is a massive part of our toolkit. Much more, and again, the simple saying is amateurs talk hardware, pros talk software. Attribute development is your CPU, like it is your operating system. And we put a tremendous amount of our toolkit is very, very heavily stacked with attribute development, and much, much, much less focused on technical tool, you know what I mean, development. Because you just don't need that many tools, you know what I mean? You don't need, you definitely have an array of tactics, but you don't need a plethora of tactics, and you definitely don't need a plethora of fucking strategies. You need very specific strategies that form up to create a kill chain that solve very specific problems. Posturing predators, blitzers, blitzing buddies, posturing pack, those being the 4 core blueprints. So anything off that part of it, the attribute side of it, or just, I mean, it's just one more point to what we're talking about.
Yeah, just, to hit on it, it's what is the quote again? It's like, a dangerous man is not a guy that has 1,000 kicks.
Oh yeah. A man that's practiced 1,000 kicks, once each isn't dangerous, versus a man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times, or that kind of idea, right?
Yeah. So, it just made me think when you start talking about attributes. We did mention in the podcast, it's like, yeah, like I'm trying to level up what I have to make sure that I could to use what the strategy, tactics, and tools and apply them in the most functional way for violence, right? I'm not trying to accumulate these boulders because, again, like we don't need the filler. So when you take out the filler and you increase your attributes, that's fucking dangerous. Do you know what I mean? In a good way, because because now you have somebody who has not just the attributes to execute the kill chain, but the certainty and there's just so much that goes to it, because it's like you've just refined what you've been doing and you've just elevated it to such a high level.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, I think we'll probably get ready to wrap this episode up. But there's a couple, just because right now where we have to go is into more of the specific. It's almost like now opening the drawers. And again, I thought maybe we'd pull open a few more of the drawers, like in terms of attribute development, giving people a breakdown of some of the attributes and understanding, like, okay, how do we organize this? Well, you can understand the different attributes you want to develop: sensitivity, spatial awareness, body mechanics, weight transfer, placement accuracy, follow through, emotional content. I mean, these become the frameworks that you can then turn around and say, okay, well, how do I build emotional content? How do I build better body mechanics, better weight transfer, placement accuracy? What's follow through even mean? How do I develop sensitivity? How do you, like, people want to talk about speed? Okay, well, there's 6 different types of speed. Initiation speed, alteration speed, like there's frameworks within a frameworks that help keep you organized. And maybe one that I'll share just really, really quickly that I thought we might pull, but the whole drawer of tools, just because for a lot of people, they collect tools, right? They're working jabs, crosses, hook punches. They're saying they're collecting omoplatas and triangle chokes and, Darce chokes and triangle, like I think I said triangle, but like straight arm bars, like ankle locks, look, you can go out there and look up videos on an entire, like, Oshigami, like, leg lock series, and there's just infinite amount of information out there on tool collection. But for example, like, one of the things I give people, and I say give it because it was given to me, and I truly do see it as a gift. But most people don't understand that, like, again, now strategy would be first, but strategy, tactics, tools. I was taught very early on that when it comes to tools is to not look at them as a collection of all these different tools, but to understand the different categories. And the fact that you have natural, designed, or expedient tools. That's it. There's 3 things. It's natural, designed, or expedient. Natural is anything that's just natural on the body. So how am I using my body to relay injury? How am I using my body to give space? How am I using my body to take space? Like there's just, again, what's the strategic goal that I need to achieve? And then how do I use the natural tools on my body to most brutally efficient accomplish that? But then you might also turn around and say, well, fuck, I'm outgunned, outmanned, they're bigger, they're stronger, whatever. But I also have access to design tools, whether that's a tactical flashlight, tactical pen, my fucking knife, a fucking like, whatever it is that might be designed to aid in, my strategic goals in achieving my strategic mission. And then there's expedient. Well, you can have a hat and a sweater and a fucking water mug and a fucking pen, your cell phone. Like there's all of these different things again that you can turn around and say, listen, can these expedient weapons, just things that I find around me that are convenient, that happen to be there, can I use these things to again achieve my strategic mission? I'm not trying, it's the simplicity of just recognizing that I don't care what the tool is. The tool is insignificant. I mean, at the end of the day, if what saved your life was some omoplata or some Darce choke or some flying triangle, whatever, like, do you care? Or like if you took a fucking pen, let's John Wick it, a pencil, you killed 3 guys with a pencil. If you had a pencil and that pencil saved your life, like for some people, that actually matters. They actually want to do it. Like they're actually driven. They're compelled subconsciously to want to get that intricate technique. Because when they're taught the techniques, they're taught techniques, and techniques become like I did this I did this thing, I did this, I got him with this fucking punch combination, elbow combination, like I got him with this stuff. But when you're trained and your toolbox is much more combat medic-esque, natural, designed, and expedient, which holds higher value? None. Like, in a situation, all I give a fuck about is achieving my strategic mission. What do you care? If the military has a goal, they have a strategic mission, a strategic goal, and they can achieve that goal through means of propaganda, dropping leaflets from a fucking airplane on across a battlefield that's trying to encourage their enemy to surrender, or spreading misinformation, or whatever the fuck they're trying to do. If they can achieve their end strategic mission and get their ultimate goal by doing that, or whether it's pushing a button and sending in a few rockets, or whether it's sending in a small 4-6 man, covert team, do you think they give a fuck how they achieve the mission? They don't give a fuck. Like, why would you? All you care about is achieving the end goal. That is what we've been talking about for the past hour, is the litmus test. So if you do not have what we're talking about, if you don't have the strategic mission, meaning then you don't know what problem you even want to solve. It's just so many times I've seen guys that think they're tough or that are fighters and also then go, well, I'm also a protector for my family. You are in some senses for sure, but you don't even understand the problem. You don't understand how severe this shit can get. Law specificity, like you're not studying criminality, then you are not as prepared as you think you are. But it's like, all that aside, it's if you don't have that, then your toolkit is going to be eclectic. You're going to accumulate. Yeah. You're going to have you rented a 50 by 50 locker, and you're going to fill it. And I know for a lot of people, the more shit they accumulate in this world, the more successful they believe they are. And if we're talking about warriors, the more shit they collect, the more skill sets they have, the more tools in the toolbox, the more functional they think they are. But the reality is that it's just the opposite is true. What makes pro fighters dangerous? They're very, very simple in what they do. Pro fighters train very, like boxers, jabs and crosses and hooks, three tools are bread and butter. And they build attributes and conditioning. I'm not saying that's all they have is those 3 tools, but very simple functional things, where martial artists are practicing 25 different strikes, from ridge hands and buffalo eyebrows and flying crane beaks and snakes and all kinds of shit.
Well, and those boxers with only, I don't want to say only 3 tools, but like with those 3 tools, those boxers still watch how much fight tape on their opponents.
Exactly.
And they're still tweaking how they're using just those 3 tools.
Yeah.
Because even they acknowledge the tool's not enough.
Yeah.
I need the tactic. I need the strategy to beat this guy.
Yeah. They go.
So they're watching hours and hours of tape on their opponent, right?
Yeah, 100%. So, anyways, I mean, I think hopefully this conversation serves some people. Again, I'll just land my plane with the combat medic analogy is one of my favorites. When shit happens, when there's a crisis, trust me, if shit's happening, you want a combat medic. When stuff goes bad, you want to be able to yell medic and have that guy show up because that guy's saving fucking lives. The parallel to that is when shit happens and you or your family's life's in danger, you want to be that combat medic / you want to be that protector for your family, ready, real, resilient, relentless, and fucking ruthless in the face of violent criminal assault, imminent grievous bodily harm, and death. I'm not waiting for the fucking medical team and the surgeon to show up with his, fucking MRI machines and all that bullshit. Like, you just want to be down and dirty fast, get shit done, fast, functional, get it done, get it in, get it out, get in, fucking, get out of there and survive kind of thing, right? That's the mission for violence. So, anyways, hopefully this helps people figure out how to organize the Warriors Toolbox. Any final thoughts, guys?
I'll just give one quick example that hits on some of the earlier things we talked about for people, but just something that happened in our training is, we had a guy come up from out of town for a 5-day intensive, and prior to him getting there, we had heard a lot about this one tool that he had gotten that he just was kind of enamored with and how great he thought it would be, and it was this tactical umbrella. And so he brought it to the program, and right away he was excited to show it to us. So he took it out and he handed it to me, and I think within a few seconds, like, I think, Greg, you could tell just by the look on my face, you're like, yeah, he doesn't like it. And I didn't even have to hand it to you. I'm like, well, Greg wouldn't use this. And like, we didn't say too much, just out of respect. Like, oh, you like it? Okay. But then as the training went on, when the opportunity presented itself, we had him doing a drill and he was doing some stuff with a stick and whatever. And then at the right time, he kind of just said, grab your tactical umbrella. And like, I want you to move around, do the same thing, but do with your umbrella. So he takes it out and he goes to do it and he goes to hit with it. And you could tell he'd never actually hit anything with it. And after like 2-3 hits, he stops, he looks at us and he goes, I dropped this. Like, I wouldn't be able to hold on to this. And we're like, yeah. We're like, good idea, like, good concept. It's not designed right. And it's like, it didn't pass the test. And he right away was like, this guy who was like enamored with this thing himself came to his own conclusion. He was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to carry this. This won't work. Yeah. And it's like, exactly. But it's because the training has those tests built in. It's like, yeah, the tool might be super great. It might be really awesome. You might think it's going to do so many good things. But if it doesn't work with the tactic and it doesn't work with the strategy, it's like, it's got to go. Yeah. And he himself was like, yeah, no, it doesn't work.
Yeah. And it's a great story to end with, actually, because that's exactly what happened. Is he couldn't fit the tool in with the strategic and tactical missions, and just realized that this is actually harming my mission success versus aiding it, which is what he thought, which he had a very strong belief that that's what it would do. And to his credit, he abandoned it. So that is exactly what we've been talking about. So maybe next time lead with that story.
I would have if I thought of it sooner.
I'm glad that you remember. I'm glad that you remembered that. We've had so many cases like that, but that was excellent. That was really, really good. So, all right, Dustin, you get the apple and the gold star today because that wrapped it up perfectly. So I won't fuck it up by talking anymore. So that's it, everybody. Listen, thank you guys so much for watching, sharing, contributing, growing the channel with us, sharing this with other men that think like we think, that are ready to take on the responsibility to be their family's protector. Men nowadays, we got to rise regardless of all the fucking noise and bullshit and the fact that society doesn't want, they don't want men to be men. They don't want men to protect. They don't want men to provide the way that men should. And fuck them. This is how you push back. We do what we do. All we care about is living our life. But that's exactly what happens. You're living your life, and at some point, sometime, some motherfucker shows up, crosses path, and thinks that he gets to play God, decide who lives and who dies. Well, fucking doom on you, right? There's evil in this world. Our mindset, we don't think evil. Our mindset is fucking doom on you. We got the strategies, tactics, tools, and the training to be that life-saving force in a dark, critical moment. And so come what may, fuck off, right? So that's it. So everybody watching this, listening to this, investing your time, we appreciate it. You're rare, you're special, and we just couldn't be happier to be here to serve you each week. So again, that's it. Thanks, Dustin, Brad. Appreciate you guys always sharing your knowledge and your years of experience. It is greatly appreciated. So that's it, everybody. Until next time, stay safe, stay weaponized. Chat again soon, everybody.